But for this particular show, using different media helped me to work through different emotions in order to be a caregiver for somebody who was physically and mentally disabled. And when in art schools, as an artist, to tell a story is considered something of a bad taste. You're supposed to talk about composition and balance and color choices, something noble like that, some basic tools of drawing, sculpture. But the work you see today is part of the story. So I will make a little introduction. And this story, of course, is very intimate, very, very private story. So back in 2014, I met my future husband, Maurice. That year, I also actually met Emily. Since Maurice had very serious intentions right away, he decided to introduce me to his mom after our first date, maybe after 2-3 dates we had, and I met Dorothy. So the very first moment when I entered her house, I felt something was wrong, but I was too embarrassed to ask Maurice what was going on. And sure enough, that year, Dorothy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And she was showing symptoms for quite a while, but Maurice, as her son, didn't see it, or perhaps didn't want to see it. You know, the denial is quite often in this kind of situation. So 3 of us, very different people, started living together. We lived in a very nice, spacious 2-bedroom apartment in Long Island City, but very soon that spacious apartment felt claustrophobic. Very often our living space would become too loud for our neighbors, and there were some awkward moments in the lobby of the building. There was a lot of physical labor needed to be a caregiver for somebody who suffers from Alzheimer's. So since Maurice was working every day, I became that caregiver at the beginning. So as you understand, we were still dating, a very early relationship. We were going to jazz concerts and seeing art shows. And at the same time, we were caregivers, like 20, 30 years married couple, going to doctor offices. So among all that jazz and art, there was this very tough situation. Going for a walk with Dorothy was a challenge as well. I took care of shopping for her, taking care of her bath activities, hair cutting, nail clipping, dressing, undressing. As a young woman, I felt I could do it. I'm strong, but there was this other element of being in a young relationship. So it was hard for me to walk into that relationship and not just trying to build up that relationship, but also dealing with the fact that the man I love also cares for somebody else who is so disabled. So eventually I suffered a nervous breakdown, and I was under heavy medication myself. And the medication was so heavy that I could wake up from pills, go to the kitchen, make dinner, have dinner with Maurice and Dorothy, and have no recollection of it. I could wake up again and go to the kitchen in order to prepare food, and Maurice said, "You already did it." And it took a while for me to recover. And moving from the city to upstate New York, I think really helped the situation. We got much bigger space, and I got art studio across the garden. So I ran to that studio quite often to escape the reality of living with somebody who was that sick. While taking care of Dorothy, which took us 5 years, I was doing artwork, and I didn't realize right away what this artwork was about. But one day, standing in the studio, I realized that the reality I was trying to escape from every day was looking at me from the walls of my studio. I did not escape, and somehow, unconsciously, or whatever word you can use, it came through. Then I start looking at the work in a more cohesive way. And now, looking back after a couple of years, I could see that there are two main categories. The first, artwork was made as a way to survive and escape and cope and stay healthy myself. And the second is the artwork made as reevaluation, rethinking of the situation. So a big change happened after I got pregnant. And it wasn't the pregnancy itself, but the fact that my daughter Irina has Dorothy's smile and Dorothy's cry. And I look at her from the day she was born as a mini version of my mother-in-law. I never forget that day when we received our first ultrasound with the very perfect profile of the baby. And I told my husband, I carry your mom inside of me, because I saw the copy of that profile I could see every day, looking at Dorothy lying in bed. So I think that having Irina really helped to build that link Dorothy and I missed, because I never knew Dorothy as Dorothy. When I met her, she was already sick. So I had to, it may sound ridiculous and strange, but I had to kind of learn what she was and imagine. And I had to learn how to love this woman who was a complete stranger for me at the beginning. So having Irina, looking at her, smiling like her, it really helped me to build that connection. So after that, an entire series of very intimate portraits of Dorothy were born, because having Dorothy's grandchild as my child, it caused me to zoom into the relationship between me and Dorothy. And it was very special time to have Dorothy as a model. Modeling for her could be unpredictable, but once she was there sitting in a wheelchair in front of me, she felt that something very special was happening, and she was getting the full attention, and she would totally relax, and to the degree she would fall asleep. So I did a lot of drawings of her, and I found her perfect for sculpture. She had very vivid, special features of her face, of her hands, her feet. So that these portraits you see in frescoes, mainly those, as I mentioned, came after my daughter was born. So I have to mention, of course, many people who were part of providing care for Dorothy, and this installation with hands is a good example of it. I had this conceptual idea of creating a massive work that would show how many hands you need to take care of one person who is this sick. So for the first time, I opened doors to my studio for doctors, nurses, physical therapists, volunteers, all the friends who helped one way or another. Sometimes it was just bringing dinner one evening, and it felt so much. So people who were not directly related to art, maybe came to the art studio for the first time, came to the studio to participate in this project. And for me as an artist, it was quite relieving and special to have very fresh eyes to look at art work and make comments that are not kind of predicted by any art school, just very raw, fresh comments. People who are not artists themselves. And I really enjoyed doing it with all the people, and as you see, there are a lot of them. And Emily told me we even include all of the hands, and this is ongoing process. There are more hands in my studio, so you can imagine how many there are.
Could you describe how they're made?
Yeah, so you may not see hands right away because it's not your traditional cast of positive space of hand itself. What I did, I asked people just to put their hands together because I wanted to capture what's in their hands, capturing that space that we really don't see. So by people putting their hands together, we got exactly that, something that we just can't see. But it's a metaphor for me. That's why I look at this work as quite realistic, but yet the most metaphorical work maybe in this show. And so people were holding their hands together, and I pour plaster paste into their hands. The process is 15 minutes long. About it, it didn't take a long time to make. And then you see all the frames are different. I wanted every frame to speak to each hand and have that individuality to it. And some people were choosing colors. I don't remember, of course, all the people and their names and which hand is which, but I do remember the hands of my husband. He chose the color of sunset for his mom. And I believe this blue one is mine. And others I may just guess. And then I guess I can talk a little bit about the beds, because you all can see it. So through 5 years of taking care of Dorothy, we had quite a few beds to accommodate her needs. And I guess every time getting a new bed and getting rid of the previous one felt not right. So I would take it to my studio and look at it differently and try to reimagine it, and of course using all the tools of working with it as a sculptor as a relief artist. So this is another metaphor of life that is unfortunately spent a lot of time in bed. Then the writings, monologues. There are 18 monologues. So they are written by me, even though you can see there are many characters. There's three main characters that are divided. Each character has 3 or 4 more characters. And this work, again, is a way for me to cope with the situation and survive mentally the situation, because having 3 people living together, so different, of course there were many arguments, and everyone could be judged so easily, but everyone wanted to be understood. So I thought, I'm gonna write every thought that goes through me as Maryna, every thought that goes through me as artist, as daughter-in-law, as wife. And at the same time, I was trying to understand what my husband felt and was going through. My husband as son, my husband as man. And same thing, I was trying to imagine for Dorothy as a woman, for Dorothy as mother-in-law, Dorothy as a lady. So there's no direct quotations, but as I mentioned, it's something that I was just trying to imagine in order for all 3 of us to understand each other and move forward with the situation and dealing with the situation that we already have.